And then my own other professor was this great botanist. So from the earliest age, I was, really aware of these two parallel processes of loss, biological diversity and cultural diversity. And I had a very strong sense that this is a story that deserved to be heard outside of the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, I guess that's why, in the end, without thinking about it, I sort of became a public academic or a public anthropologist.
Right. And contradicted the stereotype by doing a lot of field work.
Yes.
The field work was instrumental, I guess.
Oh, huge amount of field work. Huge, And now out of respect to those who are still doing field work in the really hard sense, like botany, I spent 3 years in the Amazon collecting plants, and I collected thousands of plants, and I know how tedious it can be. And similarly, real serious ethnographic field work, you get these anthropologists, and no one does it anymore, but in the kind of the classic anthropologists who would spend, his life or her life trying to understand the real nuances of a particular culture, maybe a handful of people.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to admire these people so much. So I am very careful in a strange sense not to call myself an anthropologist or a botanist, even though I have all those credentials. I think of myself really as, in a way, a storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
I don't say journalist because I don't really work as a journalist, and I don't take assignments. I generate the stories that I want to tell. But it's more that kind of story, filmmaker, storyteller. But always bringing all those intense academic skills and research abilities to bear on whatever story I try to explore.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, there's no doubt that the world is in difficult circumstances, perhaps the most difficult it's ever been in, and there's no doubt that there's value. I don't think a lot of people would these days are more accepting of ancient knowledge and its potential. But how do we reconcile those two over such great gaps of?
I don't know. Like one of the funny things that happened with this little book, The Wayfinders, is it often happens, and you probably happens where you the same way that your editor will put the title to what you've written, no matter what you want it to be. They always put their subtitle. I didn't invent that subtitle, Why Ancient Wisdom Matters in the Modern World, but it was plunked onto the book. It was a good subtitle, but it actually forced me to answer the question, which I hadn't really posed myself. But at the end, I really came to think that, why does ancient wisdom matter in the modern world? It's not that someone, there's lots of things you can talk about, crop diversity or different intuitions about the spirit realm or whatever, but I kind of came, in a way, why the whole idea that different cultures represent different possibilities, why it matters. I came down to climate change, in part because I was just sort of, when I was on my way to Copenhagen on an assignment, and the great thing about sort of this perspective is that it sort of puts a lie to those who say that we can change. As we all know, we must change the way we interact with the natural world and the atmosphere. In other words, there's a lot of sense. There's a sense people have is that okay, maybe man, even if people who accept that human activities contributed to greenhouse gases and rising temperatures, there's sort of a sense that a lot of people have. Well, so what? We'll just have to adapt because there's no other options.
Mm-hmm.
And I think certainly mitigation, adaptation will be all part of the program. But those who sort of think, well, what else can we do? This is the only way we know how to generate economic activity, by dismantling the earth or by, poisoning the commons.
Mm-hmm.
I think that what the existence of other visions of life suggests that there really are options, that we're not stuck on some kind of train wreck of history. There's no reason whatsoever that we can't change fundamentally the way that we interact with the natural world. And I don't mean by that to suggest that we all go back and live in caves, but simply that we wake up to the recognition that some of the ways that we've begun to think of the earth are fundamentally, not so much they're fundamentally flawed, but they reflect a particular unique tradition. It's not by accident that we have devitalized the earth. In our culture, we were tormented by the tyranny of the church. The whole liberation of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment was all about, if you look at that statue of Thomas Jefferson in Washington, D.C., it's, I swear upon the altar of Almighty God to fight against all forms of tyranny over the mind of man. And the whole Enlightenment thing is, it's not all about God, it's all about human possibility. And so, but when that kind of morphed through Descartes into everything was mind and matter, in other words, metaphor, myth, mysticism, faith had no place in the mind of a modern man, which was in a way the birth of modernity. We kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater, and in a single kind of phrase, mind and matter, Descartes, in a sense, devitalized the earth, right? So the idea that the flight of an eagle might have meaning was sort of dismissed as ridiculous, right? And in devitalizing the earth, or as Saul Bellows says, science having made a house cleaning of belief, we were kind of left in this world where we really thought of the earth as simply an inert, inanimate object to be consumed at our will. Now, obviously the consequences of that are all around us, and I think most people recognize, whether you use the language of the development paradigm, sustainability, or whatever, we can't go on doing what we're doing. I mean, it's not going to work. And so we're surrounded by these cultures who have lived for millennia without having that kind of, and their wisdom, if you will, suggests there are other options. And it's not like the other options are what they do. It's the very notion that there are other options suggests that we aren't slaves to this option. Right. And that we really can invent. And it won't be a retro thing. We're not going to go back to something. We will crack the orthodoxy that says this is the only way you can make a living. I mean, you see this in BC all the time. Like one of the great paradoxes I find, because I'm from BC. My grandfather was a doctor in the Rockies here, and my family's been here a long time, as long as I've known.
I know you're originally from Ontario, but you spent
No. I was born in
born in
Vancouver.
BC. Born in Vancouver. Okay.
My grandfather was a town doctor in Kimberley.
Okay.
But I've always been sort of, I realize that there's nothing wrong with the resource economy at one level. I mean, I worked as a logger, I was a big game hunting guide. It's not like, I'm not against oil and gas. I worked as a personal advisor to the biggest oil company in the world, the Hunt Oil Company, to Mr. Ray Hunt. But I've always been perplexed how in a place like BC, we've failed. And look, we have so few people, such a highly educated people. Look at these universities we have. I mean, used to be we have a couple of universities. Look, I have 9,000 kids right here, right? And all this intellectual firepower, and yet at one level, it's not even like the government. We're telling ourselves that the only way we can make money is to tear open our heritage, which is a landscape upon which our children are born. And when you think by contrast a place like Finland, which after World War II was highly dependent on resource extraction, timber, and mining, fishing, very much in a kind of if you go to Finland, you'll feel like you're. Have you ever been to Finland?
No.
It's just like you feel like you're in BC. It's uncanny. It is BC, because all that all the plants are the same. I love Finland because it's like I'm home. Just that whole northern thing. The same plants you get up in the Cassiar you get in Finland. But look what they don't run on timber, or some timber of course, but they're Nokia. They've been able to sort of use modernity to kind of get into a more, and I've always felt that BC's lagged in that way. We're so smart, we have so many great kids.
We're locked into the economic pattern.
And it's just laziness. I just think it's laziness, and the way you, I just think that. I'm not saying we shouldn't have a timber industry, but to have timber and mining the only main pillars of our economy just again doesn't seem. It seems like a dearth of imagination on the part of all of us. I mean, you think of of course, because I'm I work at Geographic. I do a lot of travel trips for their travel office, and we're very hip to the power of international travel. I mean, international travel and tourism is a $4.5 trillion business. The total capitalization of every mining company in the world is less than $1 billion. So to take an area like Stikine, the Sacred Headwaters, which is what I'm talking about, and go in there and put a 20-year mine on top of a mountain that sits at the epicenter of what would be the kind of, there's always one place in a great tourist area, Banff or Lake Louise or Jasper, it's like Yosemite, where the thing, and in international tourism, what's sort of an opportunity for Canada is that high-end tourism, you have to compete with everywhere. So the person that your client, you're not just an outfitter, picking up someone who wants to go hunting or something like that. If you want to draw tourists to any part of BC, you've got to compete with Antarctica. You've got to compete with Tibet, because that high-end tourist, which is where the money and the economy is, they're waking up on Tuesday and they're thinking, what are we going to do next summer? And they're picking up the catalogs that come through the door, and they literally can spin the dial, go anywhere in the world, get anywhere in the world in a day. But you can also get to the Stikine in a day. And when you get to the Stikine, your mind will be blown, because it's the most wild and beautiful place left on the planet. And yet here we are about to violate it. And I'm not against mines up there. In fact, we've been supporting the Galore Creek mine, which is wonderfully set off the road with no particular conflicts and ecological challenges and everything. It's a great place to put a mine and put everybody to work, just like this is a great place to put a mine. But you don't put a mine in the Sistine Chapel. And just because some jippo little outfit out of Vancouver, says it can do it, doesn't mean it should be done. And the tragedy in the case of this place is that it's a place that no one knows. What's the biggest canyon in Canada?
Isn't it Liard?
Grand Canyon of Stikine.
Stikine.
Not one Canadian in 1,000 knows it. I wasn't being cocky or, I just make a point. I wouldn't probably know about it if I didn't live up there, But okay, the Grand Canyon of Colorado has 27,000 people rafted every year, and its flow is controlled by technicians at dams, depending on the electrical needs of Vegas. And there are 11 dams along, and the river doesn't even reach the sea because it's all cannibalized, right, diverted. Well, our biggest canyon is the K2 of Whitewater Challenges. In all of history, less than 15 men and women have gone through it. No rafts ever made it. Yosemite in California, this iconic park, every year it's visited. It's only 7 square miles in the Valley Bottom. Every year it's visited by the equivalent of the entire population of LA. There are 23,000 criminal events there, 600 car accidents, and 12,000 people sleep there on a summer night. The lower Stikine is, John Muir, who first sort of celebrated Yosemite, went up to the lower Stikine in 1879, and he couldn't believe it. He called it Yosemite 150 miles long, and he named his dog after it. So these are the valleys that we're going to destroy.
Right, but you were suggesting tourism. Isn't tourism kind of an artificial way of preserving older cultures and not necessarily?
I'm not thinking in terms of tourism as a way for the Tahltan to make their economy. I'm talking more in terms of resource extraction versus not sustainable. How do you create a less impactful economy? And in fact, cultural tourism can be extremely good for everybody involved, including the culture, provided it's done with dignity and that the culture controls the process. There's absolutely nothing wrong with 3 Tahltan young boys taking out 10 rich tourists to show them how to track game through the woods, if that's what tourists want to pay for. Look, tourism can be a real mixed bag, as you well know. But there are many places where I've seen real, purely kind of cultural tourism actually become a sort of source of pride, because you're not if it becomes a kind of a dance show at a hotel, but there are ways of doing cultural tourism when the culture itself is doing the tourism, and it's just a way of saying, hey, this is who we are, this is what we value, this is what we can achieve, and then it becomes a source of pride. I'm not suggesting that every native group in the world receive tourists. I was thinking more in terms of landscape versus, versus ravaging the landscape.
Right.